Gosh, let's just start the dramatic way. Let's go way back.
Okay.
Where did you grow up?
I originally am from Cape Town, South Africa. So I grew up with my mother's from South Africa. My father's from Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And then when I was 5, we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And we moved in February. So it was high summer in South Africa to cold, gray, snowy winter in Cleveland, Ohio. So there was an immediate culture shock. But I grew up in Cleveland, which was a great place to grow up. Went through high school there. And then my father was living on the West Coast. And so I decided I need to go to college in California. I need to get out of Ohio and go to California. So went to California and actually got a theater scholarship. And then the summer before I got to the University of Redlands, they completely dismantled the theater major and got rid of all the classes and all the faculty. And they were running the college theater, but it basically became a community theater because they didn't have students to fill this theater. So when I got to grad school, I had 0 undergraduate credits in theater. How often does that happen that you go to get a master's in theater and you have no credits? But it was, I think the moving around and the different cultures and the different exposure and having parents that taught me, kids were making fun of me this week because I eat pizza with a knife and fork. Because my parents were very British and very proper and you didn't eat with your fingers. So I still to this day eat pizza with a knife and fork. But I think I started with a lot of sort of cultural awareness and my mother would put on these great fake American accents when we would go through the drive-thru at McDonald's because otherwise they couldn't understand her. So we'd make fun of her fake American accent. But moving from different places, and certainly the culture in Ohio is very different from the culture in California. And so early on, lots of different influences and lots of different experiences, and lots of different things.
Yeah, what drew you into theater? What are some of your early memories about it?
Those hokey little elementary school plays. We did this, I think in 5th grade, we did an elementary school production of The Scarlet Pimpernel, and I got to wear a cape, and it was awesome. And then when I was in middle school, the choir teacher would stage these Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. She would adapt them and adjust them. And I was not a good singer, and I was not a good student. And middle school was kind of a mess for me, but that was something I remembered but was sort of centering, and I could be silly and I could be goofy and I could just kind of relax. It wasn't like math class where I was stressed. So those are sort of the earliest memories. I remember my brother and my cousins and I would do little skits in the summer, and we'd do little dance performances by the pool and just things like that. And then when I was in high school, it's what a lot of these students talk about. I went to auditions. The first play, my 9th grade year, was Richard III. It was a great theater program with a great director. But I was on the soccer team and I was on the swim team, and I was going to do sports. And there was a girl who I liked who was going to go audition for the play, and I followed her to auditions. And I was cast as all of the guys in Richard III who die. So I would come on, do a little scene, go off stage, and then you would hear that the Duke of whatever or the Earl of whatever had died. And then I would change into a different pair of tights, different colored tights, and come back in, and I'd be some other guy. And that just started. These kids talk about, I found my family, I found my tribe, I found my people, and that did it. And I went to, I think, the first 2 soccer practices, and it was, I don't want to do this, I want to do that. That was fun, that was cool. And it was an instant group of friends, and it was an instant community, and it was a director who had a lot of fun when it was time to have fun, but then when it was time to work, it was time to work. And he made it very clear, this is a discipline, and this is hard, and this is not something everyone can do. And especially those of you who are new, this is about learning a craft. And even at that young age, that he impressed that on me, that this wasn't just, let's get together and put on a play. It was, there's a craft here, there are skills here, there are things that you need to learn how to do and practice and master if you're going to be a part of this. And so that was in me very early on. And then we did a musical every other year. So that first year, my 9th grade year, we did Camelot. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to sing very well for that. I may have auditioned and not been cast. But then I got involved in the tech crew. And I thought, wow, this is just as much fun in a very different way. And we had a great tech director who was very much the same philosophy. I'm going to teach you specialized, marketable skills, but you have to learn how to do them, and you have to learn how to practice them, and you have to get good at it. So high school was for me very much about, they're trying to teach me skills that are going to be useful later on. And I better pay attention. I better not just goof around because I won't last very long. And the students that I worked with were all very much part of that philosophy as well. So I remember a young lady in Camelot who I had a little crush on, the whole thing for. And they were rehearsing on stage, and I was backstage, and I was screwing around, and she looked over and she shushed me in the wings. And I thought, ooh, I better take this seriously. I better not be screwing around, because it's not just the directors that will call me on it, it's the other students. So that really instilled it in me. And then going to college, I assumed I would study theater, and I may not have been paying attention to what they were telling me, but I think it was probably good that I had to look at other areas to study, that I couldn't just dive into a theater program and just continue doing what I had been doing in high school. I was forced to go and find other things and meet other people. But at the same time, I had this community theater, and it was students, and it was community members, and it was adults, and it was visiting professors, because they didn't have professors that were on staff. And so my college theater experience was much more of a community theater experience, which I think really helped broaden my horizons as well.
Well, I know you were kind of talking about the craft, and I know even from some of our earlier conversations, you talked about like theatrical design being like a big piece of your approach even to shows as you're starting to think about them. For someone who's coming to the world of theater design and maybe doesn't know even what that is, like how would you talk about or explain what theater design is?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think it starts with observation and awareness. I think it starts with just, you went to see a play. What did you see? And I think most people will talk about the performances that they saw. But I think if you can get them to look at a professor in grad school who talked about the world of the play, and he talked about that from a design standpoint, not necessarily from a playwriting or creation standpoint. And I think if you can get people to become aware of the world of the play, not just the performances, but people have created an entire reality here. And how can you identify that? And I think it's a lot like listening to a song on the radio. You're probably going to notice the vocals and the lyrics first, but underneath that, there's a lot of math going on. There's production, and there's harmonies and melodies, and there's instrumentation, and there's orchestration and arrangement, and there's all those different levels that you probably don't notice the first time you hear a song on the radio. But if you really start paying attention and you listen to it over and over again, you start hearing some of that craft stuff in there. And I think theater works very much the same way. There's a world that's being created, and you may not be aware of all the elements that go into that. So I think talking to newcomers, it's a lot about what are you aware of as you're sitting there in the audience? And how can you become aware of more things? How can you... And it's difficult because you're probably only seeing that production once. And it's unreasonable to ask someone, okay, I want you to go see that play all 5 nights that it's here in town. But if you have that luxury of being able to really analyze, really take apart, what was lighting doing? And how was it helping to tell the story? What was sound doing? And how was sound helping to tell the story? What were they wearing? And what were the choices that were made to dress them the way that they're dressed? And becoming aware of all of those different elements, that's theatrical design. And sometimes good theatrical design is the stuff that you don't notice. You don't want people to notice it. It's jarring when there's a sudden, unexplained light cue, or a sound effect that doesn't seem to match up with anything else that's going. So you want some of those elements to be really subtle and not noticeable. And you want them to work on a subconscious level, and you want it to sort of feed into people's understanding of the play without big flashing signs pointing at them. But I think if you can get people talking about what they saw and what they observed, and you ask the right questions, they'll start seeing that there's a lot more than just the performances, the dialogue, the songs that you heard. And so I think that's where you start a conversation about theatrical design. Because the next understanding after the observation is all of those things were choices. All of those things that you observed were choices. And now we can talk about how were those choices made? Why were those choices made? What was the process of making those choices and then realizing them? And how did they tell the story?
Can you talk about I know for me as an artist, and some of this is like painting a picture, and people love these details too, but it's like, some artists like to go to a cafe and get away and listen to music and like just start to storyboard things. But like for you, maybe even in the early stages of your creative process, like paint me a picture. What does that look like for you when you're starting to think about the show and the story that you're trying to put on stage?
There was a trick, not really a trick, but when I was in grad school, we talked a lot about dramatic action. And dramatic action was defined for us as it's a verb that applies to what everyone is doing for the entire length of the play. So I go back to, and it was such a chore because we would have to go and see these productions, and then we would have to write these papers about what we thought that creative team had chosen as a dramatic action and how they incorporated that into their process. So we'd go see these productions, and then at 2:00 in the morning, everyone was writing their paper because it was due the next morning. And we're all running up and down the halls saying, what do you think the dramatic action is? What do I think the dramatic action is? Well, how is that in the sound design? And so we would joke about it, but it's the number one tool I use all the time in my process. So I will start with script analysis, and my first question is, what's the dramatic action of this play? And I try to get into the tone, and sometimes it's one reading of the script and I've got it, and sometimes it's 10 and I'm still struggling to figure it out. And from that it becomes, okay, well, if that I think is the director's dramatic, or the playwright's dramatic action, what is mine as a director and a designer? Because it can go in all sorts of different directions. And I try to explain this to students all the time. There's no wrong answer. You just need to know that verb is going to color everything else that you do. If Romeo and Juliet is about destruction, that's going to be in your set design, that's going to be in your costumes, and that's going to be in how you direct the scenes and how you stage them and the line delivery, everything. If Romeo and Juliet is about building hope out of tragedy, well, that's going to be a really different show. So I start with that because I know that if I can get a dramatic action that's going to influence how I talk about costuming and how I talk about scenic design and how I talk about lighting and how I stage the actors and how we talk about character and all of that. And sometimes that's a really challenging thing to do. So we're getting ready for Carrie in the fall, and I've read the script, I'm going to guess 15 times, and I don't know yet what that verb is. What's the dramatic action? Because everyone in the play needs to be doing that. So it's not just Carrie who's doing that. It's Carrie's mom who's doing that. And it's the girls at school who tease her that's doing that. And it's the boy who asks her to prom. So I'm really struggling with this one. You never know which plays they're just going to pop into your head and you know it, and which ones are going to take forever. I'm not very artistic. I'm not very good with my hands. So I struggle to draw pictures and storyboard and do things like that. And if I can draw it on a computer, I'm better. But I know that that's a challenge for me in collaborating. So I can't do costume sketches and take them in with my costume director and say, here's kind of what I'm looking at. Because I'd be embarrassed to show her my drawings. And they wouldn't communicate what I was thinking, because what's in my head is not what shows up on paper when I try to draw or sketch or paint or anything like that. So I do a lot of journaling, and then I do a lot of revising my journaling into conversations that I can have that will be helpful, descriptions and wordings that I think might be useful, and other people will be able to understand what's in my head. And I try to get as many people involved in that process as possible. But I always start with a disclaimer of I'm going to make choices. And I need to make these choices sooner rather than later, because we have to have plans drawn up, and we have to start pulling fabrics, and I have to decide if there's stuff I need to rent, or if there's stuff I need to build, if there's stuff we need to find somewhere. And I try to consider all of the different factors. I don't always succeed at that. And sometimes it's just, we're going to do it this way because that's the way we're going to do it. I'm not as good as I could be involving students in the design process and in the creative process early on. I tell myself because there's not enough time, but I'm not good at letting students down gently. And some of them come with their hearts in their portfolios. And it's hard to look at them and say, well, that looks good, but that's not going to work for what we want to do. Or that's not going to work for this particular production. And I'm cowardly that way. So I usually try to come in the first day with everything ready to go. There's an IB theater assessment called the Director's Notebook, but essentially they're doing a theoretic, here's everything a director would need to put together walking into the first rehearsal or the first tech meeting. And I try to have that done when we start. I'm not good at managing a production calendar. I just want to keep going. Once I get in that groove, and I need stage managers to say, you have 5 minutes left in this rehearsal and we need to stop, but I don't want to ever stop. But I always want to be moving forward. So as much of that creative work that can be done ahead of time, so I know where we're going, it means fewer times theoretically where I have to stop and say, okay, we need to backtrack because this isn't going to work. Now that does happen, happens all the time. But early on I had someone say, start with your dream. You're probably not going to be able to do that given the budget that you have and the equipment that you have and the students that you have and the time that you have. But always start with your dream. Don't ever start with, well, it'd be nice to do this, but we don't have the money to do that. Because invariably, you're going to limit yourself to what you think you can do, which means you're never going to know what you can do. I'd much rather start with, here's the dream. Let's see how much of it we can actually do. And it always falls short, but it's always more than it would have been if I had started with, well, here's the list of stuff we can't do. So my first time reading the script is, wow, If I had unlimited time and unlimited resources, here's what I would do with this. And then the second time through and the third time through, I'm not one who can multitask, so every reading of the script is for a different purpose for me. Some people can just read it and say, okay, I've got it, but I'm going to read it for character, and then I'm going to read it for lighting, and then I'm going to read it, and I'm going to put little tabs in of all the special effects that I don't know how to do yet, and then I'm going to. So summertime, this week, when I haven't been in workshops and seeing shows, I'm reading my scripts for next year. So I've read Carrie 5 times this week. I've read Eurydice 6 times this week. And I fall asleep with these scripts on my chest every night.
Yeah. I mean, since you've been doing this for a long time, and even in the article we talked about, I mean, really that qualifies you as a master teacher, and having done this, would you say, if you could speak to, like, let's say a new director or a young director came to you and you could curate some of the things that you've learned over time into, I dare to call them tips, but things that you would maybe encourage a new director with as they were getting started?
That's a tough question, because I think my first tip for new directors is don't try to be me. Don't try to be another director. I often say to my students, it's unfortunate that your high school only has one director, because I'd love for you guys to work with other people and see other styles and other approaches and other processes. I certainly don't have all the answers. I certainly would never say that my way of directing a show or my way of putting together a calendar or my way of doing anything is the best way to do it. It's one out of many. And I think students who are able to work with lots of different directors and lots of different professionals and creative people are going to be more successful, because that exposure is really important. So my first tip is be your director and figure out what your direction style is. That said, directors need to be open. They need to be flexible. They need to control their reactions. They need to do what's best for students, whatever that means for them and for their school and for their students. They need to always make decisions based on what's best for students. And then below that, what's best for this production. And that means a lot of things. You got to serve the script. You have to honor your licensing agreement and your copyright. You have to follow whatever the rules and the guidelines of your school and your space are, right? They're just nuts and bolts, things like that. But creative people sometimes feel like the rules don't apply to me, or the rules are there to be broken. And once you've got tenure and once you've been in your district a while and you've built a reputation, then you can start breaking some rules. But I'm still getting grief about the Hanukkah candles that we lit on stage for Diary of Anne Frank. No open flame allowed, but I lit the candles. It's got to be about your students. And I worry at times that I have to ask myself at times, where is my ego in this? If there's a conflict, if there's a decision to be made, if there's something that's frustrating me or frustrating the students or frustrating the people I'm working with or frustrating my principal, it's good to take a step back and say, okay, where exactly is your ego, is your pride, is your reputation in this? So that you can get it out of this. Because invariably what's good for your ego is not going to be good for anything else. So I think that would be a tip for a new director. And then understanding that you are an educator. And I think I would say that even to directors who weren't working in schools. Your job is to educate, and not just educate your students, educate your colleagues. The teachers that you work with do not understand what you do. They don't know. That's not a world that they live in. There's been nothing in their teaching courses, their education degrees, their process of learning how to be teachers that has exposed them to what you are doing. And to just assume that they know what you're doing and then get frustrated because they don't get it. The math teacher who doesn't understand why the kids don't have their homework done because it's tech week and they've been up too late. Not that that's an excuse for them to not have their homework done. The administrator who comes from an athletic background and doesn't understand that this is not the same as the football team or the baseball team. The new teachers in your English department who want to help but don't know how. You have to educate your colleagues. And they have to know what it is that you do and how different it is and how unique it is and how you are seeing those students that are failing their science class in a very different way. And maybe you can help fix that failing grade in science class because you've got a connection and a relationship with the kid that's really different than science class. But educating your students and educating your staff and educating your colleagues about what it is that you do. And going back to my first understanding, there's a craft, there's a skill, there's a discipline there. And the kids show up and think, oh, we'll just have fun and put on a play. And no, that's not what we're doing. This is an academic pursuit. This is an intellectual pursuit. This is something you need to work on the same way you work on your science class or your math class. And the colleagues that you have that think, oh, look how cute, they just got together and put on a show, need to know that as well. That you are giving these kids skills and you are making them practice and master those skills. And some of those kids are getting some skills that might be highly marketable. And this isn't just an extracurricular thing. This is core curriculum. And it's core curriculum that will be helpful no matter what they decide to do after high school. That's important to remember. And that's going to help you get your ego out of it.
That's good. That's really, I appreciate that. That's a really healthy perspective. I don't think everybody fully adopts that perspective.
They don't. It's very easy to buy into there's a war on the arts in our educational system. And therefore I am a victim of these big bureaucracies and administrations who would just as soon like to get rid of what we're doing because they don't value it. They don't know the time and the effort that goes into it. But it's counterproductive to be a victim. It's also insulting to actual victims, right? None of us are victims. We choose what we're doing. I was talking to a troop director from Florida, and he was talking about what Parkland and what Marjorie Stoneman Douglas did to them as a neighboring school. We are not victims. We make choices. But it's very easy to fall into that they're out to get us, right? The football team gets everything and we get nothing. And that's probably true, but you can't take that approach and expect to get what you need for your program and for yourself, right? You can't feed yourself creatively if you've got this victim mentality. So as easy as it is to fall into that, and I do, I get very frustrated when I see all of these other programs getting carte blanche. Of course they're not, but that's how it looks to me. And I'm struggling, and I can get that something. So I get it, and I understand that frustration. Even on the worst days, you can go into your space. You can close the doors. It's you and your students, and you want to be there with them. And they want to be there with you, hopefully. And you can get good quality work done. Maybe it's not what you dreamed it would be, but you can get good quality work done. So next tip to new teachers, stay out of the front office, right? If you can, stay out of the department meeting, stay out of the front office. You don't need that. You need your students and you need your space, wherever that is, even if it's the cafeteria. Go in there and do what you want to do and do quality work and let that other noise fade away for that hour that you've got class. And then you can go back to complaining about the football team.
Well, I love that. It's tapping into something that is even more, it's theater, but it's even more broadly creativity, which is this assumption that if I had this or if I had this, then everything would be magically okay. Which, for me, even as an artist, I love the constraints. The constraints are what actually force me to be more creative, as opposed to you can do anything, which sometimes is the scariest thing that you can have. But those
Yep.
are the kinds of design challenges that you want. And I think that really push you too, because if you can do anything that you want, you're not working within this sort of collaborative area of theater that we're talking about. In fact, I get excited when I can work with people like you, where you're bringing, and Carrie's bringing, you're bringing a unique vision to it. And so it's going to push me to think outside the bounds of the way I would approach design, which is going to make me a better designer. Even if that might not suit my particular style, whatever that is. I like working in lots of styles.
Yeah. And that's where students are so great, because they get necessity is the mother of invention because they're kids, right? And they don't have access to much at all. So they're really good at how do we make this work? And because they are fluent in technology that I am just learning how to use, they're way ahead in finding answers, right? They go right to, well, let's Google it. And it takes me 2 or 3 steps to get to, oh, I could Google that, right? So that's where they get great. And you're right, we want to get comfortable. And the people who are in comfortable situations can get comfortable. But I think we've all seen productions where they threw technology at this production because they had new shiny toys to play with. And maybe it served the story and helped the production, but maybe it didn't. And I think we've seen shows where it was like, it's great that you've got a dozen moving lights, but I have a headache now from all the strobing and flashing and swirling, right? That wasn't part of the show. That was just technology. And so being able to evaluate what's actually going to be of use is really important. I think it's, as educators, that's becoming our job. Not to provide information, which was, when I first started, that was the job. I was the content master in the room, and I knew everything and they didn't know anything, and I lectured it to them and they wrote it in their notebooks, and that's traditionally what teaching was. Now the information's out there. So I'm not delivering content anymore. What my challenge is all of the information is out there. How do I help them evaluate what's actually useful and what's actually valid and what's actually what they're looking for? And I think in theater, we're doing that as well. Okay, you've got 12 moving lights. Do you need them for this production? How are they serving this production? If you are going to use them, how are you going to use them? And yeah, it spurs us to be creative in a different way. I think creativity for a long time was get the equipment and the creative juices will flow. But I think you're absolutely right. The constraints are where you get really creative because you have to be.
Well, this is a great segue to make. I was thinking, will we be able to take a leap into this area of projection design? Because I wanted to talk to you about it because, of course, you've done it. And even at this conference, there's a lot of people that I'm talking to who are enamored by it, want to find ways to incorporate this new medium into their shows.
Yep.
You having been a person who's done it and have some experience in it, like if somebody comes to you and the idea is like, how do I get started incorporating projections into my shows? Like, what would you say to them?
My first question is going to be, why do you want to use it? Because it's got, I keep coming back to this point, but if it doesn't serve the story, if it doesn't serve the production, if it doesn't integrate fully with everything else that's happening on stage, it is going to be distracting. And that can't be the goal, right? No one element, no matter how cool it might be, can distract from everything else. So that integration is what I'm going to be looking for. And if they've answered those questions, I'm going to feel better about it because they're going to know how to use it. Again, it's the technology exists. The skill and the creativity is in how do you use it in a way that's going to be productive and creative and original and integrated in everything else that you're doing. I think technology has allowed us to work in vacuums more. It's easier. Because we can send things back and forth, we don't have to meet as a production team necessarily. But I think that can become a detriment to your production. If the lighting designer is working in a vacuum and the scenic designer is working in a vacuum and whoever's doing your projection work is working in a vacuum, I hope you all meet opening night in the same place, but there's a real possibility you won't. Some of the best creativity for me has come from sitting around the table, old-fashioned, with notebooks and sketches, and saying, hey, I never thought of that, but that's a really cool idea. What do you think of that idea? And I think if we lose that face-to-face creative collaboration time, we're running the risk of losing our productions and letting them run away from where we wanted them to go. So getting back to projections, I want to know that it's going to integrate with everything else you're doing in the production. It's not going to overshadow what you're doing. I think it's important to go and see production work being done. And it's becoming easier and easier because more and more productions are incorporating that. But go and see stuff and start getting a sense of how people are using it. Not just the technology that they're using, but how are they incorporating it into their storytelling? Because I was very clear that I had seen some stuff I didn't like. I had seen some projection work that wasn't serving that production the way it could. And so I was very wary of getting into that situation. And I think our first conversations were about, it was a lot of here's what I don't want to have happen before we got into here's what I'd like to see happen. But I think there are those cautionary tales out there. I think we see productions and elements in productions that we say, okay, I want to stay away from that. And I think it's important to make notes of those things because it's so tempting to just jump into it. And everyone wants new shiny toys. I always want new shiny toys. But I think projections in particular are an area that will call attention to themselves if you don't handle them well. And I think we're enamored with the Broadway shows. And even though we're in the business and even though we have an understanding of how those work, some of the stuff that's out there is really amazing. And I don't think we fully grasp everything that's happening. When I go and see Frozen on Broadway and I watch some of the really intricate projection stuff that they're doing in that, with making the proscenium freeze and projecting onto the coats. And it's like, wow, that's a really cool effect. They've got millions of dollars in their budget. They have the luxury of doing some effects that maybe I don't have the luxury of doing. And it's not just financial, it's artistic. Because part of what we don't realize is I'm sitting in the second mezzanine and my audience at home is going to be a lot closer. Maybe that effect isn't going to work. Maybe it's just going to blow up in my face. And maybe on a smaller scale, those types of things won't work. So I think for someone who's just starting to look at projections, my first comment would be, don't be afraid of it. Because it's doable on any scale. And it's becoming more accessible. So don't be afraid of it, but know that it is a tool. It's not the be all end all of your production. It's not going to save a bad production. It's not going to carry your show for you. It's not going to mask the imperfections. It's not going to distract your audience from something that's not working somewhere else. It's not a cure. It's a fun new tool in your toolkit, but you have lots of tools. You need to use all of them, and you need to use them in a way that it all comes together.
Yeah. Let's say that there are the right artistic considerations and it does feel like it's appropriate and that it's going to gel in with some of those scenic elements purely from a standpoint of you've turned on a projector, you've pointed at a screen, you have some of those like in the trenches type experiences. Like if maybe a teacher was approaching you from that perspective of like, how do I just get rolling, like even with the tech, if maybe I'm not a tech genius myself, like what would you say there?
That's how I started. And my first thing was, who are the people who can teach me how to do this? Who are the people who know how to do this? And I reached out to you, and I reached out to Price, and I reached out to anyone who I thought might be able to help. For me, and I do that with everything, because I know technology really well from 20 years ago. But there's a lot of stuff now with lighting that I don't know. There's a lot of stuff with sound that I don't know. I know how to work a reel-to-reel and run recorded sound from that. Who's got a reel-to-reel anymore, right? So who are the people who can help me? And I usually start with whatever the local university is, because those people are doing it, and those people know how to do that stuff. And those people have deeper pockets than you, so they may have technology that you don't have. And at the least, those professors and those staff people, you can take them for coffee and ask them, how do you do this stuff? How do you use this stuff? At best, they may say, hey, let me come and work with your students. Or, hey, we've got 4 25K projectors that we're not using in the fall. Do you guys want to use them or rent them? Right? So there may be, I think there are incredible benefits from partnering or communicating with whoever your local college is. And it allows students to see that's the next step, right? When you finish with high school, that's where you're going. So let me bring this guy in. I brought in Price on James, and he did an afternoon session, and he taught them After Effects. I don't know After Effects. And certainly didn't teach them all of it, but he taught them enough. What's great about those Adobe products is, number one, most schools have a license so you can use them. But number two, you only need to know 5% of what they can do. And you can do everything you need to do. So this isn't a commercial for Adobe,
No,
but
you just described the last 10 years. I've just spent 10 years and I know probably 5% of what After Effects
I mean, our guy who teaches Photoshop, he's the first to say, I have been studying Photoshop for 10 years now. I probably know 10% of what it can do. But that's 150% of what I can teach these kids and what they need to know to do what they do. So in an afternoon, he had them using After Effects and creating animations. And I sat there just wide-eyed, like, this is amazing. So find the people in your community who are doing this stuff and who can answer those questions. And what do I need? And be very honest. And sometimes as designers and directors and teachers, we don't want to let on what we don't know, right? We've had this expectation on ourselves that we know how to do stuff, but be honest with what you don't know. And if you don't know anything, start with, I don't know anything. I like to start meetings like that with, talk to me like I'm a 10-year-old and explain this to me, because it's hard for me to get all the jargon and get all the ideas all in one sitting. And I'm scribbling notes, and then I go and look at my notes and I can't understand them. So I've been very fortunate that I've been able to come to conferences and find those workshops. And I'll usually stick around after the workshop and say, hey, I have this idea. I have no idea how to do it. Can I buy you coffee? And they'll say, sure. I don't know how you do all of that, but I can help you with this one piece of it. Great. What's the machine I need to buy? Oh, the machine is called this, and it costs about $350 on Amazon. You need one of those for this reason. And I'm a step closer to where I want to be. So conferences and those people at your local university and those people in your district who've done stuff before, I'm going to talk to as many people as I can. I'm not as good at like watching the YouTube videos about how to do it, right? I'm sure there's a whole series online about how to add projections to your production, but I need face-to-face and I need to be able to ask my questions. And so, but these kids, I know they're watching those video series online and they know how to do stuff. So that's cool for them.
Let's do one or two more. You're doing sensationally well for someone who said that he couldn't even speak his last name. I'm enjoying this. I'm learning. I hope you're having fun too.
Yeah.
This is. I mean, I could geek out on this stuff all day.
How am I doing? Okay, good.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Are you kidding? This is fantastic.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. The thing about it is like, I don't know what it is about cameras too. It just.
I know.
It doesn't. I honestly think it doesn't matter how much time you're in front of one too. It's like there can always be a degree of like, oh, the camera's on now. Well, let's change it up a little bit for the.
Okay.
I'm gonna pick my favorite two for last two.
Okay.
What show makes you laugh?
Yikes.
I know it's like I threw you a curveball.
What show makes me laugh? Noises Off makes me laugh every time. I mean, I love that show. Most shows make me laugh. As someone who, the comedies are your moneymakers. I feel as a teacher, it's important to throw in the tragedies, throw in the dramas, throw in the heavy stuff, throw in the stuff that that has a message and a meaning, right? I want these kids exposed to more than just the laughs, right? And the Disney musicals, although those are great. But the well-written tragedies have comedy in them. And I need that because they're dark. So I'm going to talk about it's Hamlet and everyone's dead at the end, but what are the funny parts? Like, what are the funny speeches? And as a teacher, that's how you engage students with Shakespeare, right? Like, there are clowns. Find the clowns in this tragedy. Find the characters that are saying funny stuff. Like, why is Polonius hilarious in Hamlet before he gets, So I think, so most things make me laugh. If they don't make me laugh, you're in trouble because I'm not interested, right? It may be deep and meaningful. Now, most things also make me cry. I cry at everything. So that's a tough question because I don't know if I can pinpoint the shows that make me laugh, but there are shows that make me emotional one way or another. And those are shows that I just love.
Talk about that, like what touches you deeply, either a show or even just themes in a show that you feel like really resonate with you personally.
I'm still thinking about what makes me laugh. And Almost Maine makes me laugh and cry. I'm thinking of what are the shows that make me laugh and cry at the same time. Servant of Two Masters makes me laugh, even though it's silly. And, shows that allow, I think the shows that affect me are shows that are deeply human. There are scripts that I read every year that I have never produced. I read Dark of the Moon every year. I love that show. I've never directed it because I think there's a lot in that show that's just either not appropriate for high school students or not appropriate for my high school. But either way, but human beings are so wonderfully messy. And there are, unfortunately, a small collection of shows that show us in our glorious mess. Crimes of the Heart is a show that shows how messy we are, and I find that show delightful. So that's what I'm always looking for, as I'm reading scripts, and not just reading scripts for what can I produce next year, but just what's out there and what are people doing. And the shows that resonate for me are the ones that show how great we are, even though we're so flawed and so messy. Laramie Project. And there are things that are funny in Laramie Project. And I know that, you're not allowed to say that, but that's what makes it a brilliant piece, is that it's not just, you're not being clobbered over the head with theme all the time. So it's funny you ask, what are the themes I come back to? The good scripts are the ones that have themes that aren't themes, right? Like capital T themes, right? And there are plenty of scripts out there that are just going to beat you down with important messages. That's important, but There are ways to do that without it being so heavy-handed, so thick and wrought. There's a great line in Claire Chaffee's Why We Have a Body, which premiered Magic Theater in San Francisco. This is a total tangent. You can cut this all out. But I was a box office manager at the Magic Theater in San Francisco. I left college and moved up to San Francisco with a buddy, and I had no money in my pocket, and I couldn't pay my rent, and I was working 3 jobs, but I was helping at the box office. And Claire Chaffee's Why We Have a Body premiered there, and it was supposed to run for 3 weeks, and it sold out every performance, and they kept extending it and extending it and extending it, which was not good for me because as the box office manager, I had to balance the house every night, and I was not good at accounting and math. And when we didn't sell out every show, you could just sort of fudge it, right? You could just add a ticket here, take away a ticket there, and no one would know. But we were selling every ticket, so I had to make the math work. And I remember sitting in the lobby crying until 2 a.m, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong and adding up that night's accounting. But there's a great line in that show where she turns to her daughter and she says, "You've got to just enjoy the human condition. That's why it's there." Those are the plays that get me.
Yeah. Well, last question.
Don't make me think of shows that I can't remember
I
right now.
won't do that. Completely in your view, why does this old thing called theater, why does it matter?
I talk about that in my beginning theater classes. That's how we sort of start the year. We start with, what is theater? But I bring up, this has been around 3,000 years. Film hasn't replaced it. Television hasn't replaced it. YouTube hasn't replaced it. Like, we keep coming up with these new ways to tell stories, but we haven't replaced theater. I think there's something about being in 3 dimensions that is important. I think there's something about being immediate that is important. Theater is happening here and now in a way that film and TV aren't. Nothing you see online is going to be different if you watch it again and again and again and again. And there's an agreement made by the performers in the audience that we are going to take a huge risk right now, and there is no way to fix it, and there's no way to do over, and there is no way to catch it if it falls. We're just going to have it happen. And we like that adrenaline the same way we like going to see scary movies. We like the immediacy of it. We like that risk the same way that we liked going to the circus and watching the tightrope walker. There is something daring and bold about it that is not at risk when you go to a movie. It's flat and it's made of light and it's not happening now, and it was made years ago. And I love the movies, but it's not the same art form, and it's not going to replace theater anytime soon. That, and it's human, right? Plays are about people. They're about us, which is why we laugh and why we cry and why those shows that I'll see noises off anywhere, anytime, right? I'm not ever going to get tired of it. I'll go see Romeo and Juliet anytime, any place, because it's going to be brand new every single time. Even if it's the same stage, even if it's the same cast, same director, it's going to be brand new every time. And that takes guts, right? And it takes guts to watch it, and it takes guts to do it. And I think that's why it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. In fact, I think we realize at a level that we might not be able to articulate that in this world of technology and YouTube and online and video, I think at some level we know we need it more. The theater may be one of the last places that we can actually connect as human beings. Without screens, without goggles, without any of that cool stuff that I love, but it's not the same, and it's not going to replace theater anytime soon. Yeah. I'm looking forward to virtual theater where everyone's got their goggles on and we're all watching a play. We're all walking through it.
Awesome. All right. Well, that was fun.
That was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for doing it.
Sure thing.
Carrie, thanks for coming along.